The spaceship's engine hummed softly, a steady pulse beneath a sky stretching impossibly dark above. Riley adjusted the controls in the cockpit, each movement deliberate, her fingers dancing over buttons, switches, and holographic displays with a practiced ease. The destination was supposed to be a quick stop on a barren moon, an uninhabited rock on the fringes of known space. A few hours of refueling, a little quiet before her next job. Nothing special. Except that she wasn't alone anymore. She thought the message was a glitch at first, a malfunction in the navigation system. It had flickered on the display, a burst of static and flashing coordinates. But when she checked the location, something else had flickered behind it, an encrypted file, one that had bypassed all her usual security checks. Her eyes narrowed at the flashing red light. Unfamiliar, alien tech. She hadn't signed up for this. With a frustrated sigh, she punched a few commands into the console, but the screen only blinked back at her, taunting. She was going to need a closer look, too close for comfort, really. Her fingers hovered over the buttons, heart racing as she set the course. Whatever had found its way into her systems was a problem she couldn't ignore. The ship landed smoothly on the moon's jagged surface. Dust plumed up in the rearview as Riley strapped herself into the reinforced suit, pulled on her helmet, and stepped into the airlock. The door opened with a heavy thud, releasing the sterile air of her ship into the cold, desolate vacuum of the moon. The planet's surface stretched out before her, a gray wasteland under a sky filled with distant stars. The kind of place where secrets buried themselves quietly. Only today, it wouldn't stay quiet. Riley's boots crunched against the dry surface as she walked toward the location of the signal. It didn't take long to find it, a large, twisted piece of machinery, half buried under the regolith. It was unmistakably alien, gleaming darkly under the harsh light. A small, pulsing light winked from within, barely visible beneath layers of grime and ancient dirt. The signal was coming from here. Riley crouched down, pulling a portable scanner from her belt. She ran it over the machine's surface, fingers brushing the smooth metal. The warmth of it struck her as odd. Despite the cold of the moon's surface, this thing was almost alive with heat. It thrummed beneath her fingertips, an odd hum that vibrated in her chest. She frowned. No way, this was just a derelict piece of tech. Someone had left it here on purpose. She clicked the scanner to decrypt the data it was transmitting. Her stomach dropped when a familiar language scrolled across the screen. The language of the Zoonkar, the most feared species in the galaxy. A race of ruthless conquerors who didn't believe in mercy. They conquered worlds like a fire-consuming drywood, burning every culture they touched into dust. The thought of them sent a chill down her spine. What was their tech doing here? Hello? Her voice was swallowed by the silence of the barren landscape. Anyone there? No response. With her pulse racing, she activated her ship's long-range communicator. Riley Ross to Fleet Command. Come in. I've found something, and it's Zoonkar. She waited, eyes scanning the horizon. But no one answered. Damn it, just my luck. She pulled herself to her feet, about to turn back to the ship when a strange sound caught her ear, a metallic creaking, like something shifting in the ground beneath her. Her breath caught. It came from within the wreckage. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized that the signal wasn't just coming from the machine. It was coming from something alive, something trapped. Another sound echoed, low and guttural, a groan from deep within the machinery. Riley's hand instinctively moved to her blaster, but she hesitated. She didn't want to kill whatever it was, especially not if it was a person. Or something more. Before she could make a move, the ground trembled beneath her feet, and a section of the wreckage lifted, sending a cloud of dust billowing into the air. Riley jumped back, hand on her blaster. A figure emerged from the wreckage, shimmering, graceful, and completely naked. She froze, staring. It wasn't human. The creature stood tall, its body composed of smooth, gleaming skin, a radiant hue of pale violet under the dim light. Its hair, long, dark, and impossibly thick, hung in strands that seemed to move with a life of their own. But it was the eyes that unsettled her the most, black, liquid, endless pools of darkness. There was a haunting beauty to the creature, but it was far from comforting. It was alien in every sense of the word. "Who are you?" Riley demanded, her voice tight with disbelief. The alien woman, she realized with a shock, stared back at her, unblinking. The words that escaped her lips were unexpected, as if the alien was speaking directly into Riley's mind, its voice rich and smooth, but laced with confusion. You've seen me," the alien murmured, a note of horror in her voice. Riley blinked, stepping back instinctively. "What do you mean, seen you?" The alien tilted her head, a sharp glint of something darker flickering in her eyes. Then, with sudden movement, she lunged, her hand snapping around Riley's wrist. "No," the alien said, her voice low and insistent. "You've seen me, now you're tied to me. Forever." And in that instant, Riley realized, nothing on this mission was going to be as simple as she thought. Riley's breath hitched as the alien's grip tightened around her wrist. The smooth, warm skin felt almost otherworldly, like it was made to encase her, to pull her into something far beyond her control. Her pulse raced, her heart pounding in her ears as she tried to wrench free. But the alien's touch was unyielding, her hold stronger than Riley would have expected for someone so slender. "You don't understand," the alien said, her voice low, almost desperate, yet calm. "You've seen me. Now we're bound by the laws of the Zoonkar." Riley blinked, her mind struggling to make sense of the words. Zoonkar? The name was familiar, vague whispers of a race that had terrorized entire systems, leaving nothing but charred planets in their wake. But she wasn't supposed to be tangled up in anything related to them. She was just a pilot, a freelancer, someone who lived in the fringes of the galaxy to avoid the larger conflicts. "How the hell did I get here?" "What the hell are you talking about?" Riley spat, yanking at her wrist again. The alien didn't even flinch. "You've seen me," the alien repeated, her black eyes narrowing in something that looked like a mixture of frustration and recognition. "You were not meant to see me. It is against the law. But now you've witnessed me, I cannot leave." Riley's breath came faster, her mind scrambling for some way out of the bizarre situation she found herself in. "What do you mean, cannot leave? You're saying that you have to stay with me?" The alien's lips curved, a slow, unsettling smile. "Yes. We are now tethered by the laws of the Zoonkar." There was an air of finality to her words, a weight that settled on Riley's chest, pressing in from all sides. She couldn't breathe. "But why? What does that mean?" Riley's voice cracked, her frustration growing by the second. The alien didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced down at their clasped hands, her eyes lingering on the way Riley's pulse fluttered beneath her skin. It was a strange, almost delicate moment, one that seemed out of place in the middle of all this chaos. "My people, the Zoonkar, believe that if one is seen in their true form by another species, that bond is unbreakable." She tilted her head, her dark hair moving in slow, deliberate waves as she studied Riley. "You have claimed me human. Whether you wish it or not, I am now bound to you. You will never be rid of me. And I will never leave you." Riley shook her head, a hollow laugh escaping her lips. "This is insane. I just stumbled onto a damn shipwreck, and now I'm part of your, whatever the hell this is?" The alien didn't react to her words, but Riley saw something flicker in her expression, like the idea of her claiming Riley was a reality far darker than she wanted to admit. For a moment, the alien's gaze softened, and her hand eased around Riley's wrist, her fingers sliding toward the back of Riley's hand. Riley jerked her hand away, the pulse of her anxiety spiking once more. "I don't want any part of this, whatever this is. Let go of me." But the alien stood tall, her posture regal, as though nothing would, or could, shatter the invisible bond between them. "I cannot. It is the law. I belong to you now. And you belong to me." The words carried a weight that left Riley speechless. Belong? The very idea made her skin crawl. But more than that, there was a sharp edge of anger beginning to rise inside her. She wasn't anyone's possession. "Fine. If you think I'm just going to sit here and accept that, You've got another thing coming. Riley yanked herself free, determined to take control, to push back against whatever grip this alien had on her. I'll find a way out. You can't just. The alien raised her hand with a sudden, fluid motion, and Riley's words were immediately silenced. It wasn't a physical barrier. It was something subtler, something intangible that wrapped around her throat like a chain. Her vision blurred for a moment as the world seemed to tip sideways, and the air around them thickened with tension. You will not leave, the alien said, her voice now a whisper, a low hum that vibrated through the air. You do not understand the consequences of defying the laws of the Zoomcar. If you try to break this bond, if you attempt to run. Riley's chest tightened, and she staggered back a step. What happens? The alien's expression remained unreadable, though there was a flicker of something more dangerous behind those dark eyes. You will die. Your heart will stop, your body will break. And I will die with you. Riley felt the blood drain from her face. The alien's words were not a threat, they were a promise. A twisted, unyielding fact she could not escape. She stared at the alien, feeling a sharp pulse of dread coil in her gut. What the hell had she gotten herself into? No, Riley whispered, her voice shaking. No way. There's gotta be some other way out of this. The alien took a single step toward her, closing the distance between them with a smooth, unnatural grace. There is no way out, she said softly. Not for either of us. Riley's thoughts scrambled, her chest rising and falling as if the very air had been stolen from her lungs. But in that moment, beneath the confusion and panic, something else tugged at her, a strange, irrational pull toward this being who had invaded her life without warning. She couldn't explain it, but Riley felt it. Something deeper than fear. Something like a thread that tied her to this alien, this creature who was bound to her by a force older than both of them. Her fingers trembled as she raised her hand, barely able to touch the alien's arm. The warmth there, the strange intimacy of it, made her stomach twist in ways she didn't understand. I'm Riley, she said quietly, almost to herself. The alien didn't react at first. But then, her eyes softened just slightly, her lips parting in something that might have been an acknowledgement. I know, she whispered. I am called Wraith. And now, we are one. And with that, the world around Riley shifted in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Riley's breath caught in her throat as she turned away from Wraith, the alien's presence a palpable weight in the small room. The air hummed with the tension between them, thick and oppressive. Every movement felt like a delicate balance, as if at any moment, everything might tip into chaos. Her mind raced, too fast to catch a clear thought. She couldn't get rid of her. Couldn't escape. We are one, Wraith had said, and it seemed like the world had turned upside down since then. Every second that passed, the reality of it sunk deeper into Riley's skin, lodged somewhere between her ribs and her heart. There was no running from this. No going back. Wraith stood silently, her eyes unwavering as she watched Riley struggle to collect herself. A strange calm seemed to radiate from the alien, a stillness that unnerved Riley as much as it intrigued her. This was no human. No person she could reason with, fight against, or push away. Wraith was a force, an entity beyond Riley's comprehension. What now? Riley finally breathed out, her voice hoarse from the raw edge of panic still clinging to her. She couldn't even bring herself to face Wraith completely. The weight of that bond, that law between them, seemed to follow her wherever she moved. Wraith's expression softened, the shadows of her past lingering in her gaze. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked slowly across the room, her movements fluid, graceful, unnervingly beautiful. The dark, iridescent fabric of her skin shimmered in the low light, as if it absorbed and reflected the space around her in an otherworldly dance. She was a contradiction, unreachable, yet bound so utterly to Riley. I do not know, Wraith murmured, her voice like silk against Riley's nerves. What I know is that I cannot leave. A sharp edge of frustration cut through Riley's chest. And what if I don't want you here? What if I want to find a way out of this, some way to undo whatever this is between us? There was no anger in Wraith's tone when she spoke again, only a calmness that set Riley's nerves on fire. You cannot undo what has been done. The laws are older than your species, older than your world. She stepped closer, stopping just a breath away. You will feel it. The pull. The tether between us is real. And no force can break it. Riley's stomach twisted. She wanted to shout, to demand that Wraith leave her alone, but the words never came. The air thickened with an invisible weight, and Riley found herself unable to look away from Wraith's deep, unfathomable eyes. The tension was unbearable. But then Wraith spoke, her voice suddenly tinged with something more fragile, a shift in tone that caught Riley off guard. I am not your enemy, she said softly, the weight of the words echoing in the space between them. I never wanted this either. Riley felt a flicker of doubt, the first real crack in her hard, defensive shell. She doesn't want this? The question rang through Riley's mind like a jolt of electricity. Wraith's gaze was so intense, so earnest that for a moment, Riley wasn't sure whether she should hate the alien standing before her or sympathize with her. The truth of it all was far too complicated. I didn't ask for any of this, Riley muttered, looking down at her feet, at the ground she couldn't quite steady herself on. I didn't ask to be part of your, whatever it is you Zoonkar call your laws. Wraith moved closer, so close Riley could feel the heat radiating off her. Her hand, impossibly soft and warm, brushed against Riley's shoulder. The touch was almost intimate. Riley shuddered involuntarily, her mind screaming at her to pull away, but her body refused. You will come to understand, Wraith whispered, her breath mingling with Riley's. You will learn the truth in time. I will show you. We must trust one another. Riley swallowed hard, her throat dry. Trust you? Trust me? The alien's hand lingered a moment longer, her fingers so light against Riley's skin that it almost felt unreal. Yes. Trust is something we must both learn. It is not just your freedom I seek, Riley. Wraith continued, her words deliberate, as though she was choosing them carefully. It is our survival. Riley's gaze shot to Wraith's face, searching for the meaning behind those words. Survival? From what? You keep talking like you know something I don't. A silence stretched between them, pregnant with unspoken truths. Finally, Wraith spoke, her voice a low, grave murmur. From those who will hunt us. From the Zoonkar Council. From the laws that govern us. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt too heavy, too dangerous. If the Council finds out about us, what we've become, they will come for both of us. They will not let us remain together. And if they do, they will break the bond. By force. And neither of us will survive. The warning was like ice water down Riley's spine. She felt a chill she hadn't expected, something colder, deeper than the physical sensation of the alien's touch. She hadn't imagined the stakes could get any higher. She hadn't understood how dangerous this situation was. But I thought, Riley began, but the words died in her throat as Wraith's gaze hardened. You thought wrong. Wraith's voice was sharp now, cutting through the tension like a blade. We are already marked. And the only way to survive is to stay hidden. Together. Riley's pulse quickened. 1,000 thoughts swirled in her head. Escape? It was impossible. Trust? How could she trust the very alien who had ensnared her in this bond? But as the weight of Wraith's gaze bore into her, Riley knew something undeniable. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about the space between them, the force that had drawn them together, and the path they were now bound to walk, no matter how much they wanted to resist. Wraith's fingers brushed Riley's cheek one last time, an echo of the warmth that still lingered between them. We need each other, Riley. More than you know. And in that moment, Riley knew the truth. There was no going back. The journey ahead would shape them both in ways they couldn't yet comprehend. And the future would either tear them apart, or force them to discover something they never expected. Riley stood at the edge of the balcony, the night air pressing in around her like a thick, suffocating fog. The city sprawled below, neon lights flickering, the low hum of human life echoing up from the streets, but none of it reached her. Not really. Not when the weight of Nraith's presence, her voice, her touch, had anchored Riley's mind so firmly to the impossible truth they were both now trapped in. She couldn't breathe. It wasn't the air that was thin, it was the reality of the moment. Everything had changed. Her life, her body, the world she thought she understood, it had all shattered into pieces the moment Nraith had walked into her apartment. And now, here she was, tethered to this alien with no escape in sight. A knot of tension tightened in her chest as she replayed Nraith's words over and over again. The council will come for us. If they find out, they'll break us. We'll both die. Her throat tightened, the cold, metallic taste of fear settling there. But she couldn't ignore the strange sensation that lingered deep in her gut, something between dread and a strange, unsettling pull. Something that had nothing to do with fear. It was as if her very heart had become wrapped around Nraith's presence, as much as she fought against it. Riley? Nraith's voice broke through the fog, soft and quiet, but carrying an undeniable force. Riley didn't turn. She couldn't. Not yet. Not when everything inside of her was screaming to run. To break free. To find some way to get out of this nightmare. I'm not asking you to understand, Nraith said, stepping closer, her voice a whisper against the sharp edge of Riley's emotions. But I need you to listen. Riley closed her eyes for a moment, fighting the lump in her throat, the clenching in her stomach. There was no way out. Not really. Nraith had been right about that. The bond between them was not something that could be severed with a single decision or a few harsh words. She was already bound to this alien. Her freedom, her life, was no longer her own. Still, she wanted to fight. Her body craved the release of rebellion, even though her mind knew it was futile. I'm listening, Riley said, her voice sharper than she intended. She finally turned to face Nraith, her gaze locking with the alien's cool, steady stare. There was no anger in Nraith's eyes, only resolve. And something more, something Riley wasn't ready to confront, a kind of tenderness that both frightened and entranced her. Good, Nraith replied, a faint smile touching her lips, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. I know this is hard for you. But trust me, there are things at play here far greater than the two of us. Riley felt the words sink deep into her chest, a jagged piece of truth she didn't want to acknowledge. Like what? Nraith hesitated for a fraction of a second, the silence stretching between them like a taut wire. When she spoke, it was in a voice laced with a gravity Riley couldn't ignore. There are forces in the galaxy that will stop at nothing to destroy what we have. The Zoonkar, they are not merciful. They follow the laws, and the laws dictate that the bond between us must be destroyed. Her voice dropped, the weight of her words settling into the cool night air like a stone. They'll hunt us. The moment they know we exist. I know, Riley cut in, her voice breaking as the weight of the truth crushed her chest. You don't need to say it. The air between them shifted, thick and tense, as if every word were a blade hovering in the space between them. Riley didn't know whether to run, to scream, or to break down and let herself fall into the darkness that had swallowed her whole. I can't let them take you, Nraith continued, her voice steady despite the undeniable depth of the storm in her gaze. I won't let them. For a moment, Riley didn't know how to respond. Every instinct told her to push Nraith away, to shut the door and lock it. To fight against everything that was happening to her. But as she stood there, feeling the magnetic pull between them, a new realization began to take root. Maybe she wasn't fighting for the right reasons. The thought made her stomach twist. What was she even fighting for anymore? The life she once knew? A life that felt increasingly distant, unreachable? Or was it this, the alien before her, the bond between them that neither of them could deny, no matter how much they wanted to? Why me? Riley whispered, her voice raw. Why did it have to be me? Nraith's gaze softened, the lines of her face hardening with a look that was as close to sorrow as Riley had ever seen on her. She took a slow step forward, her presence overwhelming, yet not threatening. Not anymore. It was never supposed to be you, Wraith admitted, her voice quiet, heavy with guilt. The bond, it was a mistake. A misalignment of fate. But once it happened, once you were chosen. She paused, her hand reaching out, fingertips grazing Riley's arm in a gesture that was both tender and unyielding. We don't have a choice. Riley shuddered at the touch, the softness of it laced with the undeniable power that still radiated from Wraith's very being. The intensity of their connection threatened to overwhelm her. It was as if something deep inside of her was unlocking, something she couldn't control, and maybe, just maybe, didn't want to. What are you asking me to do? Riley's voice was barely above a whisper. I'm asking you to stay with me, Brace said, her gaze unwavering. I'm asking you to fight, not just for us, but for the future we can still build, together. Riley stared at her, the pull between them intensifying, nearly impossible to ignore. The galaxy was closing in on them. The Zoomcar were coming, and Riley knew the choice before her was simple in its starkness: stand with Wraith, or stand alone. The future was already shaping itself. The question was whether she would accept it. Her heart thundered in her chest as she stepped closer, no longer sure where she ended and Wraith began. I don't know if I'm ready, she admitted. Wraith's lips curved in a fleeting smile, the warmth of it filling the silence. We don't have time. But together we can make it. Riley's breath hitched. There was no going back. Only forward. And together, they would face whatever was coming next.